Alison Sargent joins me on the set now to take a look at the papers today. Hi, Alison. Let's start with all of the reactions from the ongoing power struggle in Venezuela between the president, Nicolas Maduro, and the opposition leader, Juan Guaido.
That's right. Well, Juan Guaido is calling for those demonstrations to continue this Wednesday, and the Venezuelan opposition paper El Nacional promises that citizens will remain without fear in the street until the usurpation ends, they say. Now, protests yesterday turned violent, notably with those images of an armed military vehicle plowing into a crowd of protesters. Still, protesters told El Nacional that they're not going to be deterred. One said to the paper, "What more can we lose? They've already taken everything from us. It's now or never." Meanwhile, supporters of the president, Nicolas Maduro, well, they've also said that they're going to be back in the streets this Wednesday. The Chavistas mobilize against the attempted coup d'etat. That's the headline from the pro-government Venezuelan paper, Últimas Noticias.
What have the papers been saying outside of Venezuela?
Well, one of Maduro's biggest supporters is Cuba. The country's official paper, Granma, headlines that the opposition's attempted coup was thwarted by Venezuela's government. They say it was an attempt by just a small number of rebellious soldiers. Europe, like Latin America, is divided when it comes to Venezuela. Italy and Greece continue to support Maduro, but most other European countries recognize Juan Guaido as president. The opposition leader was on the front pages of pretty much all of the Spanish papers today. La Razón is the one you see behind me. Their headline here reads, "Liberty leads the people." Guaido also has backing of U.S. papers. The left-wing Washington Post takes a very firm stance in their editorial today about what's happening in Venezuela. They say it should not be called a coup. They say it's an uprising, and it is the latest in a series of, for them, legitimate efforts to throw off an oppressive, toxic regime. However, the Washington Post does draw a line at a U.S. military intervention, which they say shouldn't happen.
And political cartoonists around the world have also been underlining this divided support between the two leaders.
That's right, Jeannie. We can start with a cartoon from the Costa Rican cartoonist Arcadio. He shows Venezuela here erupting like a volcano, and for him we can see freedom is what's coming out of all of this. Or you could say the desire for freedom is maybe what's leading that volcano to erupt, what's leading to this uprising. Other cartoonists, though, see a very different driving force behind it. This next cartoon is from a Russian cartoonist, Podvitsky. Russia does support the regime of Nicolas Maduro. This cartoon shows Guaido being literally remote controlled by the U.S. President Donald Trump.
It's May Day here in France. It's a bank holiday. All the French papers are taking the day off, but you do have one French sports magazine that you wanted to show us. So tell us a bit about that.
So, Jeannie, they dedicate their May issue to the problem of racism in football. This is the sports magazine So Foot. They said they really wanted to help people understand what it's like for players to be targets of racial attacks during games, something that we see constantly in Europe, it has to be said. The magazine had dozens of players and former players talk about their experiences. One of them is the Moroccan player Abdeslam Ouadou. He's played for several teams here in France. He talks about a game in which every time he had the ball, he heard people making monkey noises in the stands. He says each one of them was like a gunshot to the heart, and he calls the experience psychological terrorism. His story is just one of 25 stories from players that you can read in the magazine this month.
Next now to India. Big news coming out of there, not the ongoing election, but some people say they have photographic evidence of the Yeti, Bigfoot.
That's right. This is the Indian Army, actually, which is making this announcement. They tweeted it out earlier this week. Photos allegedly of the Yeti's footprints. Now, for those of you not familiar with the Yeti, it is a tall ape-like creature from Nepalese folklore, the abominable snowman, as he's also known. We could imagine that those footprints, that is maybe what his footprints would look like, what we see in that photo. The problem is, though, that there are a lot of different things that could be making marks like that, and people on social media have been very quick to point this out. We can take a look at a tweet from the Indian writer Siddhartha Singh. He says maybe there could be a simpler explanation for this, something like perhaps someone just taking a winter hike in snowshoes. So anyway, basically, Jeannie, it's probably not proof, this tweet from the Indian Army, but just because we have not yet seen proof of the Yeti does not mean that it's not there.
That is certainly true. All right, let's just wrap up now with a claim from an economist who says he knows the reason, or she knows the reason, why today's young people aren't having as much sex.
That's right, Jeannie, and the reason is that we're just not risk takers. That's according to this economist, Allison Traeger. She says there's a whole list of things millennials are not doing, things like buying cars, buying houses, drinking as much, or having sex. What do they all have in common? Well, according to her, all of these things are very, very risky, and millennials don't like to take risks. Relationships and sex are perhaps the riskiest of all. You could get hurt, you could hurt someone else. At the end of the day, she says most millennials end up finding that it's just easier to stay inside and watch Game of Thrones or Netflix. Some people might even find it more pleasurable, but it's probably a good time to remind our viewers that without risk comes no reward.
Exactly, Allison. Thank you for that word from a millennial speaking. Thank you very much, Allison Sargent, with that look at the press review today. Of course, you can always take another look at that on our website. The address is France24.com.